Hello, welcome to the ESPN of Science Fiction, your entertainment science fiction programming network, entertainment sci-fi programming network. Zao Shanghao, Zao An, Ohayo gozaimasu, Buenos dias, bonjour, and welcome. To travel from planet to planet, to travel from galaxy to galaxy, what do you need to have? The most important thing that you need to have in order to travel from galaxy to galaxy is the spaceship. You need a spaceship. Now, it's not called spaceship anymore because everybody's in space, so much out in space all the time. So it's just called a ship, the vehicle. There are all kinds of spaceship or crafts. There's this sci-fi, Star Trek Enterprise. In Star Wars, you have the Star Wars fighters. You have the reptilian spaceship with the reptile tails in the back. The half circle spaceship, almost coming to a complete circle, but just not quite. You have the dual cannon spaceship with two big cannons on either side. Then there's the sleek aeronautical ships, the cluster ships where you have 4 or 5 ships traveling together at the same time. You have clusters of spaceships or just craft ships traveling together. There's a future looking sleek spaceship, the realistic looking ship, the fighter ship, military ship. Looks like they're just there for war. We're going to war. Bring out the military ships. There's a small 1-person or 2 people pods ship. What's important in space travel, once you have your ship, the most important thing, the quintessential item that you need to have in space travel, once you have your ship, is to go from planet to planet, to go from galaxy to galaxy. The quintessential item is speed. Speed. Speed is the most important once you have your ship. Keep in mind this, the further you go out in space, the slower time becomes. And that was well depicted in Interstellar. If you saw Interstellar, then you know the further that you go out in space, the slower time becomes. Now you can travel, let's say you travel to some place in space, leave this planet, go to another planet, and you spend 1 month. 1 month in that area will be 7 years on Earth. Then you leave that planet, you go to another planet, spend another month, 14 years goes by. You leave that planet, go further out, spend another month, and 21 years goes by. The further you get out in space, the slower time becomes. So it's essential to travel fast in order to cut back this lag of time, in order to cut back aging, right? So you go out in space, you come back and you say, oh, where's your child? Oh, well, he's graduated. What? What happened? I only spent a month in this other planet. Well, now he's a CEO of this company. What? There was a little infant. Now he's a CEO by the time you come back 2 months later. So to cut back on aging, you must have speed. Let's put it this way. Let's say that there's 135 miles between Chicago and Philadelphia, PA. You want to go from Chicago, Illinois to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania 135 miles, let's say. If you're traveling at 60 miles per hour, you will get there in 2 hours and 15 minutes. If you're traveling at 100 miles per hour, you'll get there in 1 hour, 35 minutes. So both people leave. One's 60 miles an hour, one's 100 miles per hour. The 100 miles per hour gets there with 40 minutes extra time. He's there, he's parked. The other 60 is still driving. It's got another 40 minutes to go. What can you do with an extra 40 minutes? Can you unpack, put everything up, figure out where you're going to go, get there, and he's 60 miles per hour still driving. So let's look at this way. Let's look at this another way, more on the international timeline. Let's say that you make an appointment with your friend in Paris to meet you somewhere on Fifth Avenue in New York at 3 p.m. Say, you call your friend back, meet me on this day at 3 p.m. New York time at this cafe on the Fifth Avenue in New York. Now, your friend in Paris, he has to calculate 8 hours of flight because it takes 8 hours to go from Charles de Gaulle to Kennedy. But now, not only that, he has to calculate, I'm going to leave my home to the airport to Charles de Gaulle. How much time is it? Got to calculate that time. I spend 8 hours in a flight, get to Kennedy, got to pick up my luggage, got to rent my car, get into my rental car, drive over to this cafe in New York. How much time is that? So all this time calculation he has to do in order to meet you at this cafe on Fifth Avenue in New York City. If the Concorde was still around, the Concorde, the turbojet-powered supersonic airliner, travels over 2 times the speed of sound, Mach 2.04, 1,354 miles per hour. If it was still around, now your friend could calculate 3 hours to go from bonjour to hello with 5 hours of extra time to kill. Now, what can you do with 5 hours? Can you think of something? If you have 5 hours of extra time, can you think of something you can do? You get to the cafe and then you say, well, have an espresso, have a double espresso, walk Fifth Avenue, visit the Guggenheim. Lots you can do with an extra 5 hours. So speed is quintessential. Must have it. The speed that you need, because the further that you get out in space, the slower time becomes. There's only one speed that you need. And the speed that you need is warp. Warp is the quintessential speed. Anything besides warp, people you left behind are aging quicker than you are. So to get from planet to planet, galaxy to galaxy, you need warp. Then you get there, warp and warp back, no time spared. Everybody still looks the same. Kid hasn't become the CEO of any company yet. Warp is the speed. So not just a nuclear powered jet engines that compress air with heat from fission instead of fuel. You don't want to fly with fuel. You're flying and the engines are burning so quickly you run out of fuel. If you're warp and you're using fuel and out of fuel, You go from warp to speed of sound to coasting and coming down quickly. So you need nuclear powered jet engines that compress air with heat from fission. Got to build the aircraft, got to build the craft correctly to protect you from all that combustion that will take place. So the design of the aircraft is necessary. We talked in the beginning about a few designs of different types of crafts. The design is necessary. Aerospace engineers come up with a study called biomimetics. And what biomimetics does, the crafts are designed based on studying animals. Aerospace engineers, through biomimetics, study animals and they see which animals are the best flying, maneuvering, lift, drag, and they built crafts based on studying animals. Now, the best flyers in all the animals that can fly. Now, when we talk about flying, you're thinking about birds. Other animals than birds can fly. In the podcast before this one, we said we were going to talk about it. Now we're talking about it. So if you missed that podcast, go back and look at it. We're on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, everywhere you can find podcasts, we're there. You'll find the podcast also in TheAquaPhi.com under podcasts. Go in there and look at it. And while you're in TheAquaPhi.com, pick up your TheAquaPhi. And there we're going to talk about the best ever vehicle. But we'll talk about that as we go. So biomimetics found that the best flyers among animals that can fly are bats. When we talked about the Batman, we mentioned that bats are more efficient at flying than birds. Why? Because bats have more joints than birds. And those joints that bats have enable them for more lift in flight, cut back on drag, enhances speed, so that in the world of flying, bats are more efficient than birds. And in the last podcast, we talked about Batman. We saw maybe we're seeing the future of Batman flying more efficiently than other superheroes because bats are more efficient flyers than birds. So says biomimetics, studied by aerospace engineers. So we want to engineer aircrafts that look like bats. Can you imagine if you have a sci-fi craft that looks like a bat, right? No good in lift, less drag, warp. Imagine that. That would be the most efficient craft. We're thinking about where we're seeing an aircraft that looks like a bat, and since a bat is the most efficient flyer in flying world, that would be the most efficient craft. And you heard it here first on your ESPN of Sci-Fi, your entertainment science fiction programming network. Now let's go to the bird world. In the bird world, the hummingbird is the most efficient flyer in all the birds in the bird world. The hummingbird is the most efficient flyer. The hummingbird is the only bird that can deliberately fly backwards at will. So you see the hummingbird, wings flapping extremely fast, just hovering there, right? Beaks inside the flower, getting that nectar. And he said, I missed a spot. So he goes backwards because he wants to go backward. Gets that spot. Oh, here's a bee coming. Goes backward, turn around, let the bee go by. Okay, got rid of that guy. Go back in for more nectar. The hummingbird is the most efficient flyer. The hummingbird flapping his wing can hover, land, lift, backwards, forwards. Imagine we build a craft using biomimetics, studying the hummingbird, and we build a craft looks like a hummingbird, right? The head of the hummingbird is where all your operations are taking place, command and all of that taking place in the head of the hummingbird, the body of the hummingbird, all your other compartments, and the wings flapping as fast as a hummingbird. And your craft hovers, lands, lifts, warp. An efficient craft. Efficient craft looks like a hummingbird, backwards, forwards. In the Aqua Phi, go ahead and mention this to you. Get TheAquaPhi.com. The Aqua Phi is the vessel. So it's the title of the book, but it's the vessel. That vessel is the most advanced vessel in sci-fi world. Can do what we just mentioned. Hover, go backwards at any speed, similar speed forward, similar speed backward, climb up on the waterfall, go out in space from the ocean out into the stratosphere. Read about it. TheAquaPhi.com, purchase the novel, read about it, and warp. You heard it here in your entertainment sci-fi programming network. In Dune, let's talk about the movie Dune because we saw an efficient craft in Dune and we're going to talk about it. In Dune, you saw the Dragonfly craft. It had the wings of a dragonfly, the shape of a dragonfly, the wings flapping like the way dragonfly wings flap. Biomimetics studying dragonfly found that dragonfly is efficient, is one of the most efficient flyers there are. And that Dune ship imitated the dragonfly efficiently, correctly. Because you saw that in Dune. Oh, did you watch the first? I watched the first Dune when the first Dune, I don't know if it was when it first came out, but I watched the first Dune. And when I saw the first Dune, it was like, huh, did something just happen? Huh? What happened? Did somebody move? Did somebody say something? And then you go back to, huh? What? But so I thought this Dune was going to be the same way until someone else saw it and they said, no, you got to go see it. And this is like a real friend of sci-fi. So I went to see it and this was a good movie. It kept my attention, kept going, right? So the Dragonfly craft shown in Dune, but dragonflies are resilient. Why? Because dragonflies are resilient to wind. The dragonfly can turn upside down 360 degrees at any moment. The dragonfly can fly backwards, like I talked about the Aqua Phi, can fly backwards at will. Fly backwards the same as it's flying frontwards. It makes no difference to the dragonfly. So in Dune, when you saw that dragonfly ship was being pursued because they wanted to destroy, the dragonfly ship went into the sandstorm. And then they said, well, forget it. Nobody survives the sandstorm. He's gone, right? They figured they were dead. But that ship in the sandstorm behaved exactly the way the dragonfly behaves. The dragonfly is resilient. The wind's tossing it up and down. It flips 360 degrees. It's on its back. It's going backwards, going forwards. That's what the dragonfly does. And it survived because biomimetics, imitating the dragonfly. And the Dragonfly will survive that type of storm. So the ship survived because it's the Dragonfly ship. Lots of other animals that fly. You don't think they can fly, but they do fly. So, for sci-fi reasons, let's study those animals that fly, see if we can put our warp engine in them. For instance, the mobula rays fly. Puffins look like penguins, fly. Fish fly. Yeah, they're called flying fish. Why? Because they fly. Flying fish fly. Japanese flying squid fly. The most efficient sci-fi vehicle, and you hear it here first on your ESPN of Sci-Fi, is the Dragonfly vehicle in Dune. It's the most efficient in your sci-fi movies right now until you go onto TheAquaPhi.com and purchase TheAquaPhi, read about TheAquaPhi and all it can do and how it got expanded. Then you'll be ready for book 2 of TheAquaPhi once you see how TheAquaPhi got expanded. Along with flying, we must, unless you want to eventually crash, we must also land. Now, there's some vehicles in sci-fi when you're reading sci-fi or you're watching a sci-fi movie. Some vehicles just stay up there. Look like they're just going to stay up there all the time. But most vehicles will land. So what about the landing gear? The landing gear for these vessels, mostly in most crafts in sci-fi world, the landing gear is hydraulics. And you hear it, right? The big heavy landing, a lot of air hydraulics, a lot of air maintenance in hydraulics. For others, it's laser. Right? You see the laser beams beaming from underneath it, guiding the vehicle down to landing. We love smooth landings, right? We always applaud smooth landings, especially when you're flying your plane, and it's rare to have this excellent pilot that lands real smooth, right? So you're in the plane, and mostly when you're about to land, you know it because even if you're sleeping in the plane, you hear that the wheels are coming out, wakes you, oh, we're about to land. So, and then you have the pilots that will land and it picks back up and it picks back up. You're like, oh man, land this thing before we hit the building. Don't want to hit the control tower. But there are the exception of the great pilots that you don't even hear the wheels come out. You open the window and you're like, how do they attach those stairways for people to walk out of the plane while the plane is still flying? And you look and you look, all these buildings, wait a minute, the truck, wait a minute, we've landed. Didn't even know you landed because there's excellent pilots. And a lot of times people will applaud in the plane or clapping because of what the pilot how he just landed this plane. So we love great landings. The landings that I find most intriguing in sci-fi now is you have the vehicle in the air, the landing gear comes down, the occupants come out of it, glide down the landing gear, and somehow the way this landing gear is made, it's engineered so that the vehicle stays up in the air. Now that's the landing gear that I find the most intriguing. Very intriguing landing gear. Like it, enjoy it, finding very intriguing. The most intriguing landing, along with warp speed, warp out, warp back. The infant hasn't become the CEO yet. Then you have that landing gear that comes, you slide down out of it, your vehicle stand up. Landing and warp. You heard it here first on the ESPN of Sci-Fi, your entertainment science fiction programming network. And so on the next podcast, we'll talk about animal superheroes. There is no need to fear, and many others. We'll see you on the next podcast.